My sister Jessica never lets me forget that she married a finance expert, while I married a lowly farmer. Her life is a whirlwind of stock portfolios, luxury cars, and the constant beaming approval of our parents. My life is measured in seasons, the richness of the soil, and the steady love of my husband, Liam. But when her husband's high-risk investments finally collapsed, wiping out their fortune and my parents' entire retirement, they didn't come to apologize. They drove to my farm with a demand. They insisted I sell my land, my home, to bail them all out. They saw me as the poor relation, the one they could easily push over. They were about to find out that the man they'd mocked for years wasn't just a farmer. And they were standing on his land. This is the story of how my family's gilded cage finally shattered. Follow my journey to see the full story unfold. Don't forget to subscribe for new chapters, like this intro if you're ready for some satisfying revenge, and comment below. What would you do if you were in my shoes? The scent of roasting turkey was supposed to smell like home. But in my parents' pristine Seattle house, it only ever smelled like judgment. The air was thick with it, a cloying perfume of my sister's success and my perceived failure. "Mark just landed the Henderson account," my mother announced, beaming at my brother-in-law as if he'd just discovered a new element. "It's all very high level. Derivatives, I think he said?" Way over my head. Mark, my sister Jessica's husband, gave a modest shrug that wasn't modest at all. "It's just about seeing the patterns, Carol. The market speaks a language. You just have to be fluent." He adjusted the cuffs of his $1,000 shirt, a stark contrast to my husband Liam's simple, well-worn flannel. Liam sat beside me, a quiet island of calm in a turbulent sea of arrogance. He'd complimented my mother's flower arrangement when we arrived and had listened patiently to my father's lengthy complaints about his new golf clubs. He was, as always, graceful in a way my family could never comprehend. "And Jessica just got a promotion. Director of Regional Outreach," my father boomed, raising his wine glass. "A real power couple these two." Jessica preened. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as mine, swept over to me, a flicker of pity in them. "And how are things down on the farm, Clara? Still playing in the dirt?" The table chuckled. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. It was a good year, actually. Our heirloom tomatoes got a contract with that new farm-to-table chain in Portland. "Oh, that's so quaint," Jessica said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It must be nice to have a little hobby that pays for itself." She reached over and squeezed Mark's arm. "I just can't imagine being so disconnected from where the real world operates. The stress would kill me, but so would the boredom." Liam's knee pressed gently against mine under the table, a silent signal of support. The final, predictable blow came over dessert. As my mother served slices of pumpkin pie, Jessica leaned back in her chair, a sly smile on her face. "You know, Mom was worried sick when you told her you were marrying a farmer," she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "But I told her not to worry. Not everyone is built for ambition. It's good that you found someone on your level, Clara. It takes a special kind of person to be happy as a lowly farmer." "I for one think it's sweet." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shattered glass. Lowly farmer. Liam's jaw tightened, just for a second. My father busied himself with his pie, while my mother gave a weak, apologetic smile. No one defended us. No one ever did. I looked at Liam, expecting to see anger or hurt. Instead, he just looked at me, his expression soft. He didn't care about their opinion. He only cared about mine. And in that moment, all I felt was a desperate urge to get back to the scent of rain and soil, a world away from this gilded cage. The drive back to Oregon was a quiet decompression. The oppressive Seattle skyline gave way to towering pines and misty hills. With every mile south, I felt the tension in my shoulders recede. When we finally turned onto the gravel road leading to our property, I rolled down the window. The air didn't smell of expensive perfume. It smelled of damp earth, wood smoke, and the promise of rain. It smelled like home. Our house wasn't a palace. It was a 100-year-old farmhouse we had painstakingly restored ourselves, with a wide porch and windows that looked out over 100 acres of rolling fields and another 100 of dense woodland. To Jessica, it was the middle of nowhere. To me, it was the center of the universe. The next morning, the insults of Thanksgiving faded with the dawn. Liam was up before the sun, the quiet rumble of his tractor a comforting start to the day. I met him in the barn, a mug of coffee in each hand. He was greasing a part, his hands, which my sister probably thought of as dirty, moving with a familiar expert grace. "You okay?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag and taking a mug. "I'm always okay when I'm here," I said, leaning against him. The scent of hay, oil, and coffee was my favorite cologne. "I'm sorry about yesterday." "About Jessica." He just shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "They're playing a different game, Clara. With a different scoreboard. Don't let them convince you that our points don't count. Our life was measured in acres, not dollars. In the satisfying ache of muscles after a day of mending fences. In the quiet joy of watching neat rows of winter squash grow heavy on the vine. In the shared glance over a ledger that showed not explosive growth, but steady, sustainable profit. We weren't just playing in the dirt. We were managing a complex ecosystem, studying soil chemistry, weather patterns, and market demands. It was a life of science and intuition, of hard labor and deep satisfaction. That afternoon, we walked the northern pasture, our boots sinking slightly into the soft ground. We weren't talking about derivatives or stock options. We were discussing crop rotation, the health of the creek that fed our land, and the plans for the new greenhouse we were building. This was our portfolio. This was our investment. And unlike Mark's, I could touch it. I could feel the wealth in the rich, dark soil under my fingernails. The weeks following Thanksgiving settled into a familiar, painful rhythm. The catalyst was always the phone, and my mother was always the caller. "Hi, honey. Just calling to chat," she'd begin, her voice breezy and light. But I knew it was never just a chat. The first call was 2 weeks later. "Jessica and Mark are flying to Aspen for Christmas. Isn't that wonderful? He got such a huge end-of-year bonus. We're just so proud. What are you two doing for the holidays?" "Staying on the farm, I assume?" The unspoken suffix hung in the air. "As usual. We like it here during the winter." "It's peaceful," I said, my voice tighter than I intended. "Oh, of course," she'd reply. "It's so nice that you don't have to deal with the hustle and bustle." Another call came in January. "Did you see Jessica's new car on Facebook? It's one of those electric SUVs. It practically drives itself. Mark said their portfolio had an incredible fourth quarter. He's a genius, that boy." I'd murmur something non-committal, looking out my kitchen window at Liam backing the tractor into the barn. A genius, I thought, was a man who could fix a diesel engine in freezing weather, predict a storm by the feel of the air, and grow enough food to feed 100 families. The calls were a form of psychological water torture. A constant drip, drip, drip of comparison. My mother wasn't overtly cruel like Jessica. She cloaked her judgment in the guise of maternal concern. "I just worry about your security, sweetie," she said during one call. "A farm is so unpredictable. What if you have a bad harvest? Mark has everything diversified. He's making sure Jessica will be taken care of, no matter what happens." "Liam and I are very secure, Mom," I'd say, the defensive edge in my voice making me sound like a petulant child. "We have savings. We own our land. We have contracts." "Yes, of course, dear," she'd say in a tone that clearly meant it's not the same. Each call left me feeling drained and small, as if my happy, tangible life was somehow a cheap imitation of the real thing. I was living in a black-and-white movie while my sister starred in a dazzling blockbuster. And my mother, my own mother, was the one selling the tickets. In early spring, my mother called with shocking news. Jessica and Mark wanted to drive down for a weekend visit. It was unheard of. Their version of roughing it was a hotel without a 24-hour concierge. They arrived in their gleaming electric SUV, which looked absurdly out of place parked next to our mud-splattered pickup truck. Jessica stepped out wearing cream-colored pants and heeled boots, wrinkling her nose at the scent of manure from a freshly fertilized field. Mark was dressed in what looked like a catalog ad for luxury weekend wear. "So this is it," Mark said, doing a slow 360-degree turn on our porch. "Lots of potential." The tour was excruciating. Jessica flinched when one of our barn cats rubbed against her leg. Mark offered a stream of unsolicited advice. "You know, you could triple your yield if you switched to a hydroponic system," he said, peering into our greenhouse. "The startup cost is high, but the ROI is phenomenal." Liam just smiled politely. "We prefer soil-grown. Our customers do too." Better flavor profile. Mark waved a dismissive hand. The modern consumer prioritizes consistency over profile. It's all about scalability. Later, as we sat on the porch with glasses of iced tea, Mark launched into the real reason for his visit. It was a sales pitch disguised as conversation. "I'm heading up a new fund at my firm," he said, leaning forward with the fervor of a televangelist. "It's revolutionary. We've developed a proprietary AI that analyzes microtrends in emerging global markets. It's not about playing the market. It's about solving it. The buy-in is steep, but we're projecting returns of 40 to 50% annually." Jessica looked at him with pure adoration. "He's been working on it night and day. It's going to change everything for us." My parents, of course, had already invested their entire retirement fund with him. He was just letting a few more close friends and family in. He wasn't offering us a spot, of course. He knew we couldn't afford it. He was just boasting, showing off the glimmer of his fool's gold under the warm Oregon sun, making sure we knew just how far out of our league we were. The silence after their SUV disappeared down our gravel road was a physical relief. It was like a migraine finally breaking. Jessica had left behind a faint trail of expensive perfume on the porch, a scent that felt like an invasion. I started clearing away the iced tea glasses, my movements sharp and agitated. I can't believe him. Scalability. Consistency. He talks about tomatoes like they're microchips. Liam was leaning against the porch railing, looking out at the fields. He was quiet for a long time. I expected him to be angry, to vent along with me. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm and analytical. "It's not the farming advice that's interesting," he said softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's the investment." "What about it?" I snapped, my frustration misdirected at him. "That we can't afford it?" "Thanks, I got the memo." "No, not that." He finally turned to look at me, his brown eyes thoughtful. "The numbers, Clara. 40. 50% returns. Annually." He said it was a revolutionary AI, I said, parroting the line. Liam shook his head slowly, a deep furrow in his brow. "There's no such thing as a revolution that breaks the laws of physics. Or economics. The market is a zero-sum game in the short term. To get a reward that high, the risk has to be astronomical. It has to be leveraged to the hilt, probably with other people's money." He paused, picking up a small smooth stone from the railing and turning it over in his fingers. "When you promise returns that defy gravity," he continued, "you're not selling an algorithm. You're selling a miracle. And miracles have a way of disappearing. It sounds less like an investment strategy and more like a roulette wheel." I stopped, a half-empty glass in my hand. I wanted to defend my family, to argue that Mark was a genius, that Liam couldn't possibly understand the complex world of high finance. But I couldn't. Liam's logic was as solid and real as the stone in his hand. He wasn't being vindictive. He was being rational. And for the first time, looking at the shimmering, unreal image of my sister's life, a seed of doubt began to sprout in the rich, dark soil of my mind. A terrifying thought that their gilded cage wasn't just a cage. It was dangerously, terrifyingly fragile. The summer was long and bountiful, the Oregon sun coaxing sweet juice into our berries and deep color into our greens. The memory of Mark and Jessica's visit had faded, becoming just another anecdote of family absurdity. Then, one afternoon in late August, I was listening to the radio in the kitchen while canning peaches, and a business report came on. "Significant headwinds in the speculative tech sector," the reporter's voice crackled, "with particular volatility in offshore algorithmic trading funds, which regulators are now scrutinizing for being dangerously over-leveraged." Algorithmic trading funds. The phrase snagged in my mind. I paused, the warm, sticky peach half still in my hand. It was Mark's exact terminology. I shook my head, telling myself it was a coincidence. His world was vast. There were probably hundreds of such funds. Still, I couldn't shake a small cold knot of unease. Out of curiosity, I checked Jessica's Instagram that evening. Her feed, usually a relentless stream of new purchases, Michelin star meals, and poolside cocktails, had changed. The recent posts were different. There was a photo of her and Mark from a trip to Italy 2 years ago, captioned, #TBT to simpler times. Another was a picture of her cat with the caption, "My constant in this crazy world." There was nothing overtly wrong, but the tone had shifted from triumphant bragging to a kind of curated nostalgia. It was the social media equivalent of a forced smile. I mentioned the news report to Liam. He just nodded, his expression unreadable as he dried his hands by the sink. The tide always goes out, he said. You just find out who's been swimming naked when it does. As autumn painted the valley in hues of gold and rust, our farm hit its stride. It was our best harvest on record. The apple orchard produced more than we'd ever seen, and our late-season pumpkins were the talk of the farmers' market in Portland. The air buzzed with the satisfying energy of success. The rumble of the truck, the chatter of our seasonal workers, the clink of jars as I put up preserves. One crisp October evening, Liam and I sat at our kitchen table, the farm's ledger spread before us. The numbers weren't the stratospheric figures Mark had boasted about. They were solid, earthy, and real. We did it, Liam said, a grin spreading across his face. We have enough. More than enough. He was talking about the Miller place, a 50-acre parcel of woodland adjacent to ours that had just gone on the market. We dreamed of buying it for years, not just to expand, but to protect the watershed that fed our lower fields. It wasn't a flashy purchase. It wasn't a new car or a trip to Aspen. It was an investment in the soil, in the water, in the future. The next week, we signed the papers. Standing on the hill of our new property, looking down at the land that was now ours, I felt a sense of security that no stock portfolio could ever offer. This was real. This was ours. Meanwhile, the whispers from Seattle grew fainter, as if Jessica's world, once so loud and glittering, was slowly running out of power. The contrast was a chasm growing wider by the day. We were putting down deeper roots while they seemed to be losing their footing entirely. The phone call came on a Tuesday. I saw the caller ID, Dad, and my stomach clenched. He never called me during the week unless it was a birthday or an emergency. Clara. His voice was strained, stripped of its usual booming confidence. I need to ask you something. I waited, listening to his shallow breathing on the other end. It's Mark, he said, stumbling over the words. Well, there's a temporary cash flow problem. The market took a weird turn. He just needs to cover a margin call. It's a formality, really. Just to tide them over until a big deal closes next week. He was reciting a script, using words that felt foreign in his mouth. Margin call. Cash flow. He was a retired dentist who thought a stock ticker was a kind of parade. He needs $50,000. Clara. Your mother and I. Our money is tied up in the fund. We can't access it right now. We need you to help. For your sister. $50,000. The number sucked the air from my lungs. It was the exact amount we had just paid for the new irrigation system. Dad, that's a lot of money, I stammered. It's for family, he snapped, his fear turning to anger. Jessica is beside herself. Do you want your sister to lose everything because you're hoarding cash in a shoebox somewhere? When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I told Liam, expecting him to put his foot down. Instead, he just watched me, his expression full of a sorrow that was all for me. It's your money, Clara. Your decision, he said quietly. But ask yourself this, if a bank won't give them a loan, why should you? His question was logical, sensible. But the pull of a lifetime of conditioning, of being the good daughter who fixes things, was a powerful current. I pictured Jessica crying, my father's panicked face, my mother's disappointment. With a heavy heart and a sense of profound dread, I went online and transferred the money. The confirmation screen felt less like a safety net for my sister, and more like an anchor pulling me down with her. The next week, promised by my father, came and went. Then another. My $50,000 had vanished into a black hole of silence. My texts to Jessica were met with increasingly flimsy excuses. So sorry. The wire transfer is taking forever to process. Mark's waiting on his CFO to sign off. So much red tape. Then the excuses stopped, and the messages just went unanswered. The silence was more damning than any lie. The final crack in the facade didn't come from my family. I was in Portland for a supply run when I bumped into a woman named Erin, a friend of a friend who had been in Jessica's orbit for years. Clara. Oh my God, how are you? She gushed. We were all so shocked to hear about Jessica and Mark. It's just awful. I feigned ignorance. Shocked about what? Erin's face fell. Oh, you didn't know? They sold their lake house. Had to, apparently. I heard the buyer got it for a steal. I just hope they're going to be okay. The lake house. The one they had bought last year, the one my parents had talked about for months. Selling it wasn't a cash flow problem. It was a fire sale. I drove home in a daze, Aaron's words echoing in my head. The lies, the silence, the sale of the house. It was all coming together into a terrifying picture of total collapse. They hadn't just hit a rough patch. They were sinking. And they had taken my money down with them. After my encounter with Aaron, I stopped trying to get answers. The silence stretched for 2 weeks, an unnerving quiet that felt heavy and foreboding. The phone sat on our kitchen counter, a dormant threat. It finally rang on a Saturday morning. I saw Mom on the screen and my whole body tensed. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hello, Clara." Her voice was a stranger's, flat, cold, and stripped of all its usual melodic warmth. There was no "Hi honey," no breezy preamble. "We're coming to the farm tomorrow," she stated. It wasn't a question. "All of us. Mark and Jessica too. We have to talk. Mom is everything." "It's an emergency," she cut me off, her voice brittle as ice. "Be ready for us around noon." Click. She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. A cold dread seeped into my bones, chilling me more than the autumn air. This wasn't a visit. This wasn't even a request for another loan. This was a summons. This was a pilgrimage of the desperate to their last remaining shrine. I looked out the window at the peaceful valley, at the trees standing stoic against the gray sky. The calm before the storm. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my gut, that whatever was coming tomorrow would change everything. The foundation hadn't just cracked. It was about to shatter. The sky on Sunday was the color of slate, heavy and bruised. A damp chill clung to the air, promising a rain that never came. It was the perfect backdrop for the dread that had been coiling in my stomach since my mother's call. At noon, I saw it. Mark's ludicrously expensive SUV, now streaked with highway grime, crunching its way up our gravel road like a wounded beast. I stood on the porch, Liam a solid presence at my side. I watched them get out. Jessica, who normally looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, was pale and drawn, her eyes puffy and her designer jacket looking more like armor than fashion. Mark looked like a ghost. He had lost weight, and his movements were jerky and frantic, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. My parents were the worst. My father's face was a mask of grim determination. My mother's was etched with a kind of brittle fury. They didn't greet us. They stomped up the porch steps and brushed past me into the house, bringing the cold, frantic energy of their collapsing world into my living room. They stood in the center of the room, a miserable island of 4, looking utterly alien against the backdrop of worn wooden floors and handmade quilts. The storm had arrived. "We don't have time for pleasantries, Clara," my father started, his voice rough. The story came tumbling out in a torrent of panic and blame. Mark tried to explain it with his usual jargon: unprecedented market shifts, liquidity crisis, cascading defaults, but his voice cracked, the confident veneer gone, revealing the terrified amateur underneath. My mother, however, had no patience for excuses. "He lost everything," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Mark. "Everything we gave him. Our retirement, gone. The money for the house, gone." Jessica finally broke, her voice a raw, ugly sob. "They're going to take our house. The cars. Everything. We're ruined, Clara. Do you hear me? Ruined." They looked at me, all 4 of them, with a terrifying unified hunger in their eyes. The chaos and blame had found its focal point. It was me. They had come to the last port in their storm, and they weren't asking for shelter. They were planning to dismantle the lighthouse for firewood. It was my father who finally gave voice to the monstrous thought hanging in the air. He stepped forward, his face hard. "We've looked at all the options. There's only one way out of this. You have to sell this farm," my father said. The words were flat, devoid of emotion, as if he were ordering a coffee. We had a realtor look at the satellite maps. With the new development pushing south from Portland, this land, it's worth a fortune. More than enough to cover the debts and get us all back on our feet. I stared at him, speechless. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking entitlement, left me reeling. He was talking about my home. My life's work with Liam. He was talking about erasing it, liquidating it, to pay for their greed and incompetence.
No, I finally managed, the word a small, hard stone in my throat. Absolutely not.
Jessica let out a sound somewhere between a scoff and a scream. No? How can you say no to us?
To your family.
She took a step closer, her face twisted with a venom I had only ever seen in small doses. It's the least you can do after the easy life you've had, playing in the dirt while we were out in the real world taking all the risks. We were building a future while you were hiding from it. Now you owe us. You owe us. The words echoed in the silent room. All my life, I had been made to feel I owed them something. For being different. For being quiet. For choosing a life they didn't understand. And here it was, the final bill. I felt a sudden, clarifying calm. The hurt, the guilt, the years of feeling less than. It all burned away in a flash of cold, pure rage. I owe you nothing, I said, my voice steady now. This is your mess. You will not drag us into it. As Jessica opened her mouth to retaliate, another voice cut through the tension, calm and even, yet commanding the attention of the entire room. Hold on. It was Liam. He had been standing near the fireplace, a silent observer, his arms crossed. Now, he took a step forward. He wasn't angry. He looked like an engineer studying a complex problem, his expression thoughtful. The frantic energy in the room seemed to quiet, drawn to his stillness. He looked directly at my father, then at Mark. For my own understanding, he said, his tone polite, almost academic, what is the exact number you believe you need to solve this? Mark blinked, thrown off by the question. He saw it as a negotiation, a sign of weakness. A flicker of his old arrogance returned. He was being challenged, and his pride puffed up to meet it. You wouldn't understand the numbers, he scoffed. Try me, Liam said, his voice unwavering. Mark let out a bitter laugh. Fine. You want to know? To cover the primary losses, the leveraged debt, and the initial investor claims, we'd need, at minimum, $7 million. He said the number like a trump card, a figure so laughably out of our reach that it was meant to end the conversation, to prove how out of our depth we were. My parents and Jessica stared at Liam, their faces a mixture of scorn and triumph. There. See how impossible it is? Now sell the farm. Liam didn't flinch. He didn't gasp. He just nodded slowly, absorbing the number as if Mark had just told him the price of a tractor part. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I see, Liam said finally, his voice still impossibly calm. He looked from my father to my mother, then to Jessica, before his eyes settled on Mark. There seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding here. A flicker of confusion crossed their faces. Clara can't sell this land, Liam stated simply. Her name isn't on the deed. My father's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? We checked the county records when she bought it. It's her farm. No, Liam corrected him gently. It's our farm. But we don't own the land. We're tenants in a way. He let that sink in before delivering the final catastrophic blow. This farm, he said, gesturing to the window, the 100 acres you can see, the 100 acres of woodland behind it, the Miller place next door, and the other 5,000 acres that make up this valley, including the watershed, they all belong to an agricultural investment trust, the Willamette Valley Trust. He paused, and I watched, mesmerized, as the color began to drain from their faces. My grandfather started it 60 years ago, Liam concluded, his voice as quiet and final as a closing door. I'm not just a farmer. I'm the managing director. You're not asking my wife to sell her little farm. You're asking me to liquidate one of my trust's most profitable assets to cover your bad gambling debts. He looked at them, his expression no longer calm, but as hard and unforgiving as winter stone. And the answer is no. In the deafening silence of my living room, for faces, my sisters, my brother-in-laws, my mother's, my father's, turned a ghostly, sickly white. The storm had not just broken. It had washed them away completely. The silence in the room was a living thing. It was heavier than any sound, pressing in on us, thick with the ghosts of words that could never be unsaid. My family stood frozen, for statues carved from salt, their faces slack with disbelief. The ghost-white truth had bleached all the color from their world. It was my mother who moved first. Her eyes, wide with horror, darted from Liam's resolute face to my own, searching for a crack,
a sign that this was some cruel joke.
She found none. She looked at Liam not as her son-in-law, the simple farmer, but as a foreign power, an entity she could neither comprehend nor control. The look in her eyes was a terrifying mixture of awe and pure, undiluted hatred. Jessica made a small, choking sound. Her venom was gone, replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. The fight had left her completely. The architect of my humiliation was now just a woman in a crumbling ruin. Mark didn't look at anyone. His eyes were fixed on our worn hardwood floor, as if he could see the abyss that had just opened up beneath him. No one shouted. No one screamed. Their rage had been incinerated by the sheer scale of their miscalculation. Silently, as if by some unspoken agreement, they turned.
My father, who had entered my home like a conquering general, now shuffled out like a man heading to his own execution.
My mother, Jessica, and Mark followed in his wake. I didn't walk them to the door. Liam and I stood motionless in the living room and listened. The sound of the front door closing with a quiet click. The heavy, defeated footsteps on the porch. The car doors opening and shutting.
The crunch of the tires on the gravel road. A sound that grew fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the immense, peaceful silence of the valley. And then they were gone.
When the sound of the engine had completely faded, Liam finally moved. He walked over to me, his expression gentle, and wrapped his arms around me. I leaned into him, the adrenaline draining away, leaving me shaky and exhausted. The house felt like ours again. We stood there for a long time before I pulled back, my mind racing to catch up with the day's events. I looked up at him, at the familiar kind face of the man I loved, now overlaid with this new staggering reality. A trust?
The managing director.
I whispered.
Liam, why didn't you ever tell me?
It wasn't an accusation, just a question born of pure confusion. He led me to the sofa and sat down, taking my hands in his. When I was in my early 20s, after my grandfather died, I lived in that world, he said, his voice soft. The world of trusts, board meetings, and wealth managers. I saw what it did to people. I saw how they looked at me, not at me, but at my family's name, at the portfolio.
Their motives were always tangled up in it.
He looked out the window at the fields, his fields, our fields. I hated it. All I ever wanted was something real. Something I could build with my own two hands. When I met you, you were working at that bookstore in Portland, and you talked about wanting a garden, about the smell of real tomatoes. You never once asked what I did or what my family had.
He turned back to me, his eyes earnest and full of a love that humbled me.
I needed to know, Clara.
I needed to know that the life we were building was one you wanted, that the man you loved was me, the guy who worries about aphids and fixes tractors.
Not the director of a trust. Could you have loved me if you knew?
I've always loved you, I said, my voice thick with emotion.
I know, he smiled. But I had to let us build this first. On our own terms.
This, he squeezed my hands, is real.
The other stuff is just paperwork. In that moment, any confusion vanished, replaced by a profound understanding. He hadn't deceived me. He had protected us. He had given us the gift of a genuine beginning, a love proven to be richer than any inheritance. We didn't hear from them for months. The autumn leaves fell and the winter rains came, washing the valley clean. Life returned to its peaceful, hard-working rhythm. The silence from Seattle was a balm.
News when it came was second-hand.
A Christmas card from a distant aunt mentioned it in a single gossipy paragraph. It's just terrible what happened to Carol and Jim's retirement, and poor Jessica. They had to sell the house. I hear Mark is in some legal trouble with his other clients too. Later in the spring, I got an email from Aaron, the acquaintance from Portland. Hope you're well. Crazy news. I saw that Mark and Jessica's bankruptcy was finalized. So sad. I saw her working at a high-end retail store downtown.
Can you imagine?
I could actually. I pictured my sister, stripped of her husband's unearned wealth, forced to stand on her own 2 feet for the first time in her life. I pictured my parents in a cramped apartment, their dreams of a lavish retirement replaced by the dull reality of a fixed income. There was no joy in it. No triumphant sense of victory. Just a quiet, sober acknowledgement of cause and effect. They had gambled, and they had lost. They had built their house on a foundation of arrogance and greed, and it had, inevitably, collapsed. We, on the other hand, had built our life on solid ground. The letter arrived on a bright day in May. The envelope was cheap, the handwriting my mother's, shaky and unfamiliar. It was not a letter of apology. It was a letter of strategy. It was filled with fawning, transparently false praise for Liam. I always knew Liam was a brilliant young man, she wrote. So prudent, so much foresight. Not like Mark at all. We were so wrong to ever doubt his wisdom. He is exactly the kind of man you need to be a true provider and protector. The letter was a pathetic, desperate pivot. Now that they knew where the power and money resided, they were trying to appeal to Liam, hoping to manipulate him as they had always tried to manipulate me. The letter ended with a vague plea for guidance and help in their time of need. I read it twice, then placed it on the kitchen table. The old Clara would have agonized over it, torn by a misplaced sense of duty. But that Clara was gone. I took out a simple note card and a pen. I did not write a letter full of anger or recrimination. My response was short, clear, and final. Mom, I'm sorry to hear of your difficulties. I wish you all the best in navigating them. As for us, our life and our finances are our own. The bank of Clara and Liam is permanently closed. Be well, Clara. I sealed the envelope and put a stamp on it. It was not an act of vengeance. It was an act of liberation. I was setting my own terms of engagement, drawing a boundary of bedrock and steel around the life I had chosen and the man I loved. Spring bloomed across the valley, bringing with it a riot of green. One morning, just as the sky was turning from violet to rose, Liam and I walked to the top of the hill on the old Miller place. From here you could see everything. Our farmhouse nestled below, the neat rows of our crops, the winding creek, and the vast expanse of the valley beyond, all shimmering in the dawn light. The air was cool and clean, filled with the scent of damp soil and new beginnings. I thought about the insult that had once stung me so deeply. Lowly farmer. It seemed like a quote from a book about someone else's life. It had no power here. There was nothing lowly about this. There was nothing small about a life spent nurturing the earth, about a partnership built on trust and authenticity. My revenge was not the look on my family's faces in that terrible moment. My revenge was this. This peace. This quiet strength. This sunrise, washing over thousands of acres that were not just land, but a legacy. A legacy I was now a part of. Liam wrapped an arm around my shoulder, and I leaned my head against his chest. We didn't speak. We just stood there, together, watching the sun climb higher, casting a golden glow over our valley. We were not the wife of a lowly farmer or the director of a trust. We were just Clara and Liam, at home, looking out at the endless beautiful horizon of our future. And so, our story comes to a close. My family chased wealth and found ruin. We chased a quiet life and found a fortune of a different kind, one measured in sunrises, not stock tickers. But the final verdict? I'm leaving that to you. My decision to cut them off was absolute. It was the only way to protect the peace Liam and I fought so hard to build. Now I have to ask you what you would have done. Comment, justice, if you think I did the right thing. They made their bed of lies and greed, and they deserve to lie in it, no matter how harsh. Comment, mercy, if you believe I should have offered one final olive branch. Not a bailout, but a single act of kindness to the family that raised me, however flawed. I'll be reading every comment to see what you think was the right call. Thank you for joining me on this journey.